Okay, let's talk about I'm gonna say this phrase. I'm gonna say when to say goodbye, which sounds harsh. You know, what sounds harsh to say, like, when is the right time to say, hey, I've been working with a teacher and the relationship is hard, or the I'm getting pushback, or it's too much pushback, and like, what are my options? Like, okay, I think we've as coaches, as consultants, as coordinators, we experience working with a teacher who does not want the help, and we want to talk about, what do we do? So I got Kyle here, I got Yvette here. Let's get into it, folks. What do we do in these types of situations?
I love it. I love it. What I'm going to say is that I've been there many
Ooh.
times before, and I'm sure that
Tell me
both of
stories.
you
Tell me stories.
feel the same way. And at least what pops into my mind as soon as we were talking about this topic was, you almost have kind of two battles. You have a battle with potentially a teacher that you've been working with or trying to work with, but then you also have a battle against yourself, because now you're worried, like, maybe this means that I'm just not very effective as a coach. And here's the hard part, is that it could be one, it could be the other, it could be a bit of both. But what we have to at least be able to do is be able to, like, I think, like, start recognizing that there's actually an issue, right? That, like, things aren't very productive. Why are they not productive? And, like, I don't know, like, Yvette, like, what are some of maybe the thoughts that pop in your mind when things maybe just aren't feeling productive? Usually something isn't productive, but, like, what is that? How does somebody think about this, and how do they analyze whether maybe they need to dig in a little bit here and do a little bit of thinking?
Well, and I think you kind of nailed it, Kyle, where it's like we take it super personally, right? And that
Well,
actually
how can you
sometimes
not?
doesn't help,
Hmm.
because then when you are taking somebody's response to you personally, you end up reacting sometimes in a way that's also defensive, or feels personal, right? We get almost emotionally heightened when a relationship feels strained. But I think it's important to sometimes take a step back and recognize that maybe that person's response to you being in their classroom or your offer of help has actually nothing to do with you at all.
Hmm.
It's just where they are right now. It could be other stressors they have in their lives. It could be past experiences. Like maybe they had a coaching experience in the past where they felt the trust was broken. So, kind of our first bit of advice is that when a relationship is not going well, it's super important to recognize that it's not going well and to identify potentially your part in that. Reflect on what you could have done differently, but also try, and I know it's so hard, not to make it personal. Like,
Hmm.
I think our narcissistic brains sometimes want to jump to the conclusion that this is all about us, when in reality, it's likely about that person and where they are in the experiences that they've had.
I guess, how do you make that easier on yourself? Like, how do you battle that wonder about, is it is not, like, even if you recognize it's not about me, it's about probably the things that they're going through. How do you navigate that and then still kind of come out the other side going, like, do I stick with this person, or do I I'm going to use the phrase cut and run, because sometimes I think we
Kick
have
them
that
to the
thought.
curb.
Well, we have that thought, right? It's like I don't
Yeah.
want to abandon this person. I'm a coach. I'm here to support them in their growth, and they're clearly not growing, but they're pushing back on me on that growth. I do recognize that it's a them in a way, and it's not about me. It's about the work that they're doing, but it's still hard.
I'm gonna rewind just slightly here though and say, like, let's not be too quick to dismiss that it has nothing to do with ourselves, right? So, like, what I'm interpreting from what Yvette's saying is, you know, in many cases, it's probably not a you issue. But here's the crazy part, is, like, maybe it is. And at least I think you need to be reflective enough. And this involves, I think, even the pre-planning piece, like not just going into a classroom or into this relationship without doing some sort of thinking ahead of time as to, like what is my tone? What is, am I coming in, like, you don't want to come in like a bull in a china shop, right? Where you just, you barge in and, you have a set agenda, which I think sometimes some of the most wonderfully intentioned leaders have this idea in their mind, and you set your own goals as for what you want to achieve with
True.
all of the educators in, your school, your district, wherever it might be. And sometimes we can come in a little hot, we like that, and I know I've been guilty of it. But the key is trying to at least be able to be reflective enough to try to first just go through sort of the script in your mind a little bit as to how did the interaction go? Is it possible that maybe I had, is there something I can address? Is there something I can do differently? And then, because this isn't a one and done, like you don't walk into one classroom, one day, one interaction, and then decide, like John's saying, cut and run. You're going to be working likely over time before you start to recognize that there's an issue. And I think the key is just making sure that you're not too hard on yourself, meaning, automatically assuming it's you, but we also don't want to dismiss that, maybe there are some things, and I'm sure that most people are going to come in with different approaches, and you're going to be thinking of different ways. And really, I think today's discussion is, okay, I've already been doing that. I've been trying to come in with different ideas. I've tried to come in softly. I've tried to come in with this idea. I've tried to keep things productive, and it's just not getting anywhere. And we're now at the stage where we go, okay, this isn't productive. And, I don't think that it has, 100%, onus is on me here. What do we do now? So I think that's kind of where, we want to branch off from and say, okay, it's not necessarily you, but something isn't working. So what do we do? Like, where do we go next?
Before we, get into that component in that, addressing that question, I do want to recognize what you just said is about thinking about, it could, like you said, like coming in with ideas. Like I've come in with ideas, it's still not working. It's like one of the things that we've coached, the coaches that are working with us in the district improvement program is approaching those those interactions with that leading question that we've often used here on the podcast, which is, what is the pebble in your shoe? And sometimes we come in with the preconceived ideas of what they could be doing, instead of hearing where they think the problems are, where they think where they need support. And I think you're right. It's like that's a question that maybe could fix the relationship by just readdressing how you have approached the support you have been offering, and not, you've been saying, these are the things we could be doing, instead of saying, like, where's the pebble currently rattling around in your shoe, and what can we do to support that pebble right now? Because that could be the way to maybe fix the relationship, but maybe not. So let's say you did that and it's still not going well, the relationship was not fixed. Yvette, what do you
Yeah, I
think?
think that's all good points, right? There's ways that we can foster relationships, we can change our approach, we can, you know, seek more voice from the educator to try to position them and empower them in this coaching relationship. But let's imagine we have done all those things and we're just still feeling that it's just not productive. We're not being welcomed into the room. We are having we recorded an episode about getting stuck in the helper zone. And I've been in the helper zone for months now, and I see no signs of the teacher's willingness to engage in any type of thinking together. Is that the best time and energy for me in my coaching role? And we often know, right? Sometimes a coaching role is only guaranteed for a single year, and we want to ensure that we have the greatest impact possible. And I would argue there are always other places we could be and other teachers we could be working with. So if we're dedicating a lot of our really valuable time, and I've yet to meet any district who says they have more than enough coaches, like they have
Right.
enough coaches to support
Sure.
everybody. So typically, it's a luxury to be able to have the opportunity to work with a coach. So if we're aligned somewhere that the person is just not ready for that learning at that time, or other stresses in their life are impacting their ability to make any change, do we continue to invest our time there, or Do we find a professional way to break free of that relationship to seek other opportunities where there could be potential growth?
I love it. I love it. And I think a lot of that, there's kind of a couple things that might hold you back, right, from actually trying to take that next step. One is that, you don't know how to. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Like, and I think that's something that can be addressed, and we can do this in a way that is professional and doesn't actually, emotionally hurt anyone or anything like that. But I think one of the parts that might hold you back from actually thinking long and hard about making this shift and making this move, or kicking them to the curb, as John would call it, is really fighting and battling yourself on the whether you could be successful in helping that person change. And I think that is one of these challenges that, we really have to be able to swallow your pride a little bit to say it again, if it isn't you, it might also not be your method, or it might not be the fact that you're not a good mentor or coach or leader, but rather just that, again, the timing may not be right for that person at that time. And you can work as hard as you want, and you could probably get very stressed out as well. I know that I've been there. When you're trying to make a coaching relationship work, you want the best for that person. Sometimes you want the best for that person more so than they do for themselves, right? And it can be for any number of reasons. And therefore, we really have to zoom out and say, where can I be of most help to the district, to the school, to the grade band, whatever level you're working at? And I think that is what makes it easier for you to go, you know what? It's not a gone forever. It's not a I'll never be back to help this individual, but maybe it's a pause for now, right?
Hmm.
And we have to think about that long and hard, and be able to, in your mind, be okay with it. It's not a failure just because you're going to try opening a new door with a new educator at that time.
Well, if you think about it, like even thinking about that move is hard for us as educators, because our history and our experience has been working with students, and when we're working with students, and I don't know about you guys, but most, how many students are like super eager to do as much math as they can? Like, you get some like that, but most of the work that you're doing is where, and this is where the real impact you make is, how do you help students that have traditionally hated math and not enjoyed math and didn't get math, and they say that, right? And then you go, I'm not going to abandon this student, and I'm not going to give up on this student, and I'm not going to like say that I'm going to end this relationship and I'm going to move on to another kid, even though I probably have said that in the past. Like, my old self may have been like, well, I tried to help them 3 times and now I'm just going to like focus on this kid. But I mean, like, I'm sure there's people that do that, but I mean, if you're in a coaching role, it's likely you got tapped on the shoulder because you didn't do that with students. And now you're like, I don't want to do that with another person I'm teaching,
You're
like,
the
we're
least
educators.
equipped person to be in this role where, you're going to put a pause, right, on that
Yeah,
relationship.
totally.
Like, I'm
you
not
just,
very
it's
good
not,
at that.
it's
right?
not part of like your makeup to say, I'm not going to support this person anymore.
But now it's time, John. Okay, we just have to break up. It's just
You're breaking up with
the
me.
signs have been there. We've done our best, and I think another thing too is we've gathered we've gathered feedback from the educator, and they're the ones who are identifying that this is not a good fit for them at this time. And so maybe you're getting pressure from your supervisor, or from the principal of that building. You've been asked to work with this teacher, but you've been collecting evidence and you've been gathering voice, and you've just decided that this is not the best fit at this time. I think it is challenging, certainly, and sometimes getting support from the principal or from your supervisor to make this transition could also be challenging.
Yeah.
But again, coaching support is few and far between. There are always other educators who are eager for the learning, or maybe just in a different position and ready for that learning. And so to continue investing your time in a place that's just really not productive, maybe it's not the best use of the limited budget or the limited time that you have in that role.
Right.
So, Kyle, you kind of alluded to the fact of how do we do this?
Yeah.
So there's people listening who are like, yes, I hear you. I'm in this situation. There's a particular teacher that I've been asked to work with, and I'm not making any gains with this teacher. They're not in a place to receive this learning or to engage in this partnership. I go in and they ask me to work with this one student every time, but that's not really my role. But I know that, teacher down the hall
Yeah.
is eager and ready and has been asking me to come in. So how do you actually
Mhm.
initiate the conversation to say, I just don't know that this is working right now.
Right.
I'm going to shift my energy elsewhere.
Well, and the part that I think is really important is that ending, as we call it, ending the relationship doesn't necessarily like have to be as explicit to the educator. Meaning, if it is
You're gonna
true,
ghost them? Is that what you're
right?
saying?
Yeah, no. But what I think in your mind, you're ending this relationship for now. But I think for that educator is what you really want to say, and I think you want to be open and honest about this, is that it's time for you to move on to another classroom to help in another area, right? And that's not, they don't necessarily have, you don't have to give them the full rundown of the whole analysis of why this isn't working and so forth. This isn't a relationship like a high school breakup, right? Like, I think what you want to do is you really want to be just essentially letting them know that, there's some opportunities in some other classrooms where I'm going to do some co-teaching. And because, I can have a direct impact there, this is what I might be doing during this regular time slot that I've been coming into this classroom. But the caveat here, and this is what I think is really important, is thinking about maybe ending the I'm going to be in here at every Tuesday at whatever time, or Tuesdays and Thursdays at whatever time, is thinking about what else can you do that will still allow a little bit of support to be provided. And I think of our breadcrumb strategy that we talk a lot about, right? So it's like, you're in there, you're not going to be in there as often, but you're not going to forget about them, right? And what really kind of popped into my mind, John, was when you were talking about that student in our classrooms. Even though you're not going to give up on any student, there are some days where that student might be really having a rough day.
Sure.
And that's probably not the day that you're going to sit with them and try to really get them to, be the best they can be, because they might need some time.
That's right.
Alone. Right. So I haven't given up on you. I'm just pausing for now, and I am going to come back to you. Whereas in the coaching world, I think the same is true, where, now what you're going to do is you're going to be just open and honest about how you're going to shift your schedule moving forward so that you're able to get into some other classrooms. And then you get to decide, how you design that conversation to make sure that that educator, it doesn't have to be a direct conversation to say, well, the reason I'm leaving is because you haven't been open for me to be helpful to you, and maybe for some people that will work. I know for me, I would much rather look at it and say, I've been coming in here for quite a bit of time, and I feel like at this point, I think that, we've done quite a bit together, and, I'm going to come back blank number of weeks, blank, after so long, or I'm going to check in to see, is there anything that I might be able to do to support you in the meantime? How does that sound to you? Right. And that's where you can kind of like, volley the ball back to that individual as well, so that they can let you know what they're thinking. And if it is an unproductive relationship, they're probably going to be okay with this arrangement, right? But it also doesn't have to get too emotional. It doesn't have to get too specific, unless you feel like it's necessary at that particular moment. But I want to hear, Yvette, like how are you doing the ending of the relationship for now? Is it coming out and you're giving them everything that you're thinking, or do you have a strategy or something in mind that that you're thinking about here?
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's, I like the idea that the door is staying open and that you're offering to support, but maybe the support is a little bit less direct. So, I'll still be here in the building. If you want to connect on your prep, I'll be available. So, continuing to make yourself available to that person, but pulling back on that scheduled direct support makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So you're not disappearing from their life. You're not ghosting them,
Right.
but you're just putting your energy elsewhere.
And I wonder too if it's like, if there's something that, let's say, you are actively focusing on, right? One of the objectives, let's say, in your math program in your school or your district is, the easiest one is like number talks at the beginning of class. If that's the goal, but this teacher hasn't really been open to it at this point, you can also leave them with that idea, right? Is like, hey, listen, if you're thinking about adding this pedagogical move, this content knowledge, this whatever it is that you're trying to focus on as a school or a district, you can leave that for them so that you leave the door open to say, listen, if you do want to explore more, I'd be happy to come back in so that we can really hone in on this one specific objective, because that's what we've been focusing on as a school or as a division, and
Yeah.
I think that can kind of leave things in a positive light. And it also leaves the door open that you're still encouraging them to kind of make some of the shifts that you were hoping to do when you came into the classroom, but you weren't really seeing happening.
I like that. I like that approach, because what you're doing is you're saying the focus is still here, and these are the objectives that are aligned with the focus on the professional development and support we're trying to provide as a school or a school district. It's in alignment with our school goals or our district goals, because we have those things. Like, you're still making it clear that that's the support you're there to provide when they're ready, and here's maybe what you can do in the meantime. Like, you're in a way, like, you're leaving that there, but also reinforcing the goal and the priority of the work. A wonder I still have here for you two folks is, okay, how do I, and it's two different wonders, but I want to share both with you. One is, how do you have this conversation, and what do you say to your supervisor or the principal of the school? And then the second is, in a similar way, is what are you? I wonder about the implication of what the rest of the teachers think as well. Like, are we concerned about, like, hey, is it clear that that teacher didn't work, or that coach didn't work with that teacher? And is that tell me I can opt out too? Or, you know what I mean? Like, so as like, what is the impact that happens when this happens with the rest of the community?
That's a
Who
great question. Like,
who
really
wants it?
asking the tough questions today, John.
I know.
I don't know that I have an answer for that, but let's ponder this, and then maybe we can circle back to it. I guess my question is, what's the alternative? So if I don't make this bold choice to part ways with the teacher where the relationship's unproductive, to find other opportunities for growth, then what happens when the year comes to an end? So now I've dedicated an entire year
Right.
in a room
True.
that was unproductive.
Yeah.
Where I
You
felt
didn't
I
hit your
had-
key result, probably.
Right.
Right.
And so, as much as there may be challenges in approaching these conversations, getting support from your admin or possible perception from the rest of the staff, I guess that is worth it, in my opinion, over
100%.
remaining somewhere where your impact, like, you're measuring your impact, and the data is telling you you are not supporting change in that room.
You are perpetuating sameness, right? And I think when you say it that way, I think that's going to be a big epiphany for a lot of people listening, because this topic, I think we all knew it coming into this conversation. It sort of sounds bad on the outside, right? Because again, it isn't about, sort of giving up on someone, but rather by just trying to redirect the very limited resources that we have, right, to support educators. And if we can do that the best we can then at least start aiming for, some of those objectives and aiming for some of that change, rather than getting to the end of the school year and actually just feeling more frustrated than anything, because you probably tried even harder because you were trying to make change in that classroom, but it didn't happen. And therefore you're in the same spot, if not, working backwards.
Agree.
And maybe, a last thought to leave our listeners with today is, imagine you take a step back from that classroom and you start working with another teacher down the hall, and there's an enthusiasm and excitement from that educator that you're supporting, and that's spreading excitement in the building for opportunities to work with you. And maybe, because the teacher that was reluctant is hearing from their colleagues how positive the experience was when you were
Right.
co-teaching, maybe that's what they need to come around to the idea. And to Kyle's
That's
point,
right.
like maybe they just weren't ready then. Maybe it was a bad time for them. Maybe there were stressors in their life and
Sure.
their bandwidth was, compromised. And so I am fearful of yet another year going by where we've stayed in the same place because that's where we started and we want to see it through,
Mm,
knowing that we're just not going to have the impact we were hoping for.
interesting. It's like the way you're describing that moment is to say like I know what it looks like when I have success, and I know what it looks like when I need to move on so I can get another success. Right? Like we need to compound our successes, and you have to decide where is the cutoff point to say, okay, do I keep going here because I've always done it that way, or do I say this is where my cutoff point lies so that I can still get successes by the end of the year? Because I think you're right. Like our resources are limited, our coaching is limited, the impact that we have is limited. The students wouldn't, the impact on students is timely. Like those students move on year to year. Like we often wonder about the impact we have on the students in front of us when we're trying to have professional development for our future students, but they're still sitting in front of you and we still have to worry about them. So are we making an impact on those ones? And can we make an impact on more students in this way, which is maybe the conversation you have with your supervisor and your leader and the principal?
Yeah, I think a great place, for some takeaways here for everyone walking away is really thinking about, when we do go into a new coaching relationship, is how do we best position ourselves so that we can build that trust and we can build that, vulnerability that's required for an educator to welcome you into their classroom. And I think everyone's going to have a different sort of, we'll call it like secret sauce to their approach, right? Everyone is different. Everyone has a different personality. So there's no one way to do this, but trying to identify what you feel is going to work best in your role and in your skin, I think is really helpful. And I think for me, the word is vulnerability. And if I can come in and I can be the first vulnerable person in the relationship, I think you're setting yourself up for at least the best shot, or at least I'm setting myself up for the best shot. Because again, this might be different for a different person. But if I can go in there and if I can help to build trust by kind of bringing down the guard, bringing down the shield a little bit, at least you're putting yourself in the best position possible so that you can do the best with that relationship at that time. But then at some point, you do need to have, a little bit of a critical eye on the entire relationship to determine, are we making progress, or is it time for me to potentially explore other opportunities in the district for coaching?
When I think about, the six key components of effective mathematics programming at the district level or even in the classroom level, like we talked about a few things here in this episode, but I think what stands out for me is we're talking about, professional development structure, but also which is the limbs of our tree. So we're like thinking about the limbs of our tree and how do we structure this effectively, which is in a way sometimes how you think about coaching and coaching interactions. But I think another thing for me is about how do we align with the mindset of which is the soil, the water, the sunlight of our around surrounding our tree. How do I think about these interactions myself? And the thing that I think one of my takeaways is when you think about these like is you're gonna feel like that's a failed relationship, but it's like there's no failures. It's like there's learning experiences, right? So either you have a success or you have a learning experience. You don't fail. It's just what did you learn so that you can apply that to the next relationship. And we will always just get better if we have that mindset, which is our soil, water, sunlight of the tree that we're trying to grow.